We're here today to honor the four young artists who have won the awards for the year 2016. You will get a chance to see their work later in the evening when they're introduced to you by Mortimer Chatterjee, who will also show you slides of their works. Chatterjee is one member of the eminent jury, which includes Shilpa Gupta, Abhay Sardesai, and Jaideep Mehrotra, that chose the awardees this year. I cannot thank these jury members adequately for spending long hours in the meticulous selection process that chose these winners. We're fortunate in having with us our keynote speaker, Ranjit Hoskote, cultural theorist and curator, and perhaps the most sought-after authority on art in the city, and dare I say, in the country today. The boundaries of art have been extended far beyond our conventional ideas. One of its latest manifestations, that of the performance artist, will be demonstrated this evening by Pallavi Paul. After the performance, Pallavi will have a conversation with Ranjit. Today's awards, apart from the grant, include a one-month residency within the country. More than 140 artists have been assisted over the years in some form or the other. In recent years, we have found that artists prefer to attend residencies rather than acquire degrees. And so the foundation supports them in some of the finest residency spaces in the world. These include Gasworks and the Delphina Foundation in London, the Darling Foundry in Montreal, the ISCP in New York, Skowhagen in Maine, and the Rijksacademy in Amsterdam. The foundation has also had a long-standing relationship with Citadel Art, which is the Pistoletto Foundation in Italy, where artists have attended residencies. This year, INLAX, together with FICA, is supporting a curator at the Goldsmiths College in London. In India, the artists have attended residencies at Khoj, New Delhi, Bar One and Tajski in Bangalore, What About Art, Kona and Space 118 in Bombay, and Sandarbh in Rajasthan. In addition to all these, INLAX also has a curatorial lab at JNU's School of Art and Aesthetics and supports the peer program at Khoj. It funds exhibitions at the Mumbai Art Room and awards museum fellowships together with the IFA Bangalore. There are numerous other projects underway at present and many others in the pipeline. But now let's get down to this evening's presentation.
INLAX scholars have left their mark absolutely everywhere on India's public life. So for all of these reasons, I think, for me, certainly it's a very special occasion to think about questions of support for cultural initiatives, support for cultural work, and what it means really to be an artist in troubled times. So I'm going to really address some of these questions in what I have to say today. There's something in the nature of our contemporary artistic practices which is built around a fundamental paradox, and that paradox is this. On the one hand, as practitioners, we have a certain degree of privilege, the privilege of our practice, the privilege of the rules by which our practices are defined. But on the other hand, there's also a great precariousness in terms of how we exist in the world, how people respond to the work we do. So the criteria and parameters by which art gets looked at in the public sphere has very little to do with the field of art. Those criteria, those parameters seem to emerge from the domain of celebrity or the mediatic sphere. And I think that there is really, it's a problem, but it's also a very interesting problem. How does one reclaim that space of conversation? Yeah, so I'm going to touch a little bit on the inheritance, the legacy of the Romantic moment. I'm going to talk a little bit about the avant-garde. I'm going to talk about the Gesamtkunstwerk. And finally, I'm going to talk about what might properly be called contemporary art, post-1989. Artists work from a structure of feeling, and audiences work from a structure of expectation. On the one hand, there is an attempt to continue with the defiance of and a provocation of the audience, but there's also a strange, even tragic desire to bridge that antagonism and to therefore blur the line that separates art from life. So I would like to think that the crisis of language and legibility is very strongly pertinent to the moment of the avant-garde. I now want to move sort of sideways to look at the Gesamtkunstwerk, which is closely associated with Wagner and with the opera. The fourth of these genealogies that I've tried to draw for contemporary art is, in fact, contemporary art. So we're looking here at forms of art that moved well away from material objects, that moved towards immaterialization, towards social engagement. Art as pedagogy, art as performance, art as distributed intermedia occasion, and also art as a set of collecting or archival or collaborative practices. From the moment of the Romantic, from the avant-garde, there is a certain self-perception as being alienated, if you will. It is a productive alienation because it gives you a different kind of standpoint on reality and on the world. But nonetheless, there is a sense that one is alienated, one is apart from, and one has one's own territory conceptually to define. If you are willing to see that you're a worker among others, if what you bring to the table is a certain kind of labor, however immaterialized, however conceptual, without that, you don't actually appreciate the work that other kinds of people are bringing to your projects. Residencies are crucial because artistic practice, like any form of cultural practice, requires refinement and recalibration with reference to its own internal logic and also to stimuli that it receives from a rapidly changing environment. Would such an artist take that expertise and make that simply part of what I've called a professional narcissism? Is it something that will continue to replenish an individual career, its own idiosyncratic moves? Or, and to that extent, will the artist then be an expert among experts in a highly technocratic ethos of the kind we live in? So that's one possibility. Or might the artist use that expertise to open up other kinds of spheres of engagement with non-artists, with collaborators specifically who happen not to be artists? Would the artist then become a sort of trustee of expertise is the kind of question that I have in mind.
Before I open up the specific project which I have brought with me for discussion, I would like to take you through the larger concerns at play in my practice. And I use a simple question as a point of departure for doing this. I ask repeatedly myself and the world, what is a fact? In a beautiful passage on exhaustion, novelist Roberto Cavallini writes, and I quote, "Exhaustion is any place whatsoever, even in the middle of nowhere. Over there, it is neither passive nor active. Exhaustion is not even in between the possibility of being together. The passivity of action, exhaustion, can just be something that resides within the tangible appraisal of an essential solitude. No company, no friendship, no love, no fear. There is no sharing of exhaustion." Unquote. I reckon that the fact can be thought of as an exhausted story. After all its adventures are over and its promiscuity is silenced, the story inhabits the celibate garb of the fact. The story I bring to you today is that of an SOE secret agent, Noor Inayat Khan. A historical counterstatement in some ways, her story has been mostly liminal to history writing and public memory in the UK, but to a larger extent in India, and that's her. Noor was the great-great-great-granddaughter of Tipu Sultan, the emperor of Mysore, whose iconic struggle against British colonialism has been well recorded. Enraged by the spread of fascism and left to find a living for her family and siblings, Noor enlisted in the British Army and was very soon picked up to be a radio operator by the SOE, owing for her flair for languages. She, of course, spoke English and French, and her ambiguous looks. She was now a secret agent. So in my most initial thoughts about this would-be film, I was thinking in the mode of an abstract form of investigation, or intentionally finding something out by accident. But this foolproof plan of mine, which was all geared towards serendipity, came to a grinding halt when I did finally start reading her official file. A crime had occurred, but there was no dead body, no murder weapon, no crime scene, no time of death, and no identifiable criminals. In other words, the only document then that was available to me was the story itself. To give you a better sense of this, I read to you two contesting entries from her files. Entry 1. She was taken with 3 others to the Dachau camp on September 12th of 1944. On arrival, she was taken to the crematorium, made to kneel against a mound of earth, and shot through the back of her head. Another entry says, and this is a letter written to the brother of Noor by the SOE, "Dear Mr. Khan, According to our investigations, we can confirm beyond doubt that ASO Noor Inayat was amongst the girls who was taken captive at the Natzweiler camp, given a lethal injection, and immediately cremated. One thing became quite obvious to me, that what I had in front of me was not even a story, but actually a claim to a story. And I use the term claim for its restlessness. A claim has to always be made, it is always in construction. The thicker the information and the facts, the more obscure became her body. And so I understood that I needed to create a philosophical extrapolation, if you may, not in spite of this tussle, but because of it. Having laid out the basic shape of the material, I would now like to fast track to the use of the Morse code, which is very central to this performance, in use for over 100 years now, and extensively used during the Second World War. Morse code is a system of converting alphabets into procedural signs. The signals comprise of dots and dashes, are pronounced as dit and da, respectively. What also made the use of the Morse interesting for me was that not only was Noor using it a lot during the war, but also that as a language it was meant to be enunciated only by machines. In making the body the premise for this sonic enunciation, in which the word masquerades as a note, and I mean note both in its musical sense as well as a noting in a file or a record. And in linking the mechanical to the sensual, what I'm trying to do is to pull at the entrails of this marginalia, where more has to be erased for more to be seen. And the scroll that you see in these images, which I will also unfurl amongst all of you today, is actually her file. It is her file, which I have transcribed into Morse code. And the performance needs all of us to read all of those entries together in Morse. And I hope that doing this will help me reinscribe her back into history with some kind of a critical force, and also push at the possibility of gibberish as a form of intelligibility. So let's get dit dying. The possibility of something so precise also sounding so much like gibberish, you know. And to me, it was very much, like I said, an allegory to the way I saw the establishment, or the official kind of the SOE narrative, framing the possibility of Noor's disappearance. The relationship between history and future is very much a relationship about the persistent trace of the future in the path of history, and history in the path of the future, and whatever that may be, you know. And to me, the archive represents that tension, you know, that it represents this, to me, it's the question of the trace. It's not the question of the story, but there's a trace of the story, you know, that you keep encountering at the archive. And every single time, the trace presents itself differently to you.
You know, I find that for a professional historian, these explorations or these discoveries or these accounts become part of a larger disciplinary account.
I don't know in what different contexts the story will find resonance with different kinds of things, but I definitely am sure about one thing, that I want to keep alive the agility or the possibility of it participating in different contexts. That's something that I'm very sure about. So again, like, I think the material in itself is so troubling that you need to keep sort of enacting it in some ways, and renegotiating with it, and reconvening with it in different ways.
So, of course, we're gathered here today for the four young artists that are sitting up at the front. It's the opportunity that we have now just to present each of them to you, and little snapshots of their work. Let me go in reverse order. So, Tahire, maybe you'd like to go first. Tahiri Lal. Thank you. Sobia Chashmawala. Mitun Das. And lastly but not least, Abir Mukherjee. Thank you.